How did Ed Sheeran become one of today's most popular musicians? How did he reach the point where he is completely selling out entire stadiums, including Madison Square Garden? And how is he able to do all of this while staying down to earth, true to himself in his music and what he is writing? What's going on, guys? My name's Jeremy and I'm back here with My Music Mastery. Today we're going to be diving into one of Ed Sheeran's songs, which I'm sure you know, Thinking Out Loud. We're going to be analyzing this song, looking at what he does when he's writing his own music and how we can implement those same tactics into our own music. Let's jump into my computer. Alright guys, welcome back to My Music Mastery. As I said in the introduction, today we're going to be taking a look at Thinking Out Loud by Ed Sheeran. Intro / first verse is going to sound like this. Alright, we'll stop it right there. Now, just right off the bat, the introduction, obviously, as you just heard, it starts off with just an electric guitar with a ton of reverb on it and Ed Sheeran, his vocals. So starting right off, let's talk about the chord progression. It's a super easy chord progression here that we've got. So it's in the key of D. It's going to be a 1-4-5 chord progression. Essentially what that means is we're starting off on a D chord. It's a 1 chord. Right here, they add in the F sharp in the bass, so it's a D or an F sharp over D chord. Right here goes to a G, which is going to be the 4, and then right here it goes to an A, which is going to be a 5. And then that just repeats through the intro and the verse. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's look at the vocals here, the melody. I'm going to solo it real quick for you. It's going to sound like this. Okay, so that first line. Now you'll notice that this is a very active melody line, right? One thing about Ed Sheeran's melody lines is that he has a lot of rap background. You'll notice if you listen to a lot of his other music, he does rap in a lot of his music. In any case, getting back on track here, you'll notice that this is a very rhythmic melody line, right? Something like that, right? I think a lot of the focus on Ed Sheeran's music is more to the vocals, and that's why, for instance, with the chord progression that we were just talking about, that's why the chord progression is probably so simple, because he wants you to focus more on him and his voice. Now, as far as the melody line, you can see here it starts on the 3rd, which is going to be the F sharp, goes up to the 5th, which is going to be the A, and then it goes up to the 6th on the B. That is as high up as it goes. Then it starts going back down, and it kind of follows that same thing, right? Goes back to the A and then back down to the F sharp. But then it goes on to the E, and it takes a whole step down to the D, which is going to be the root. And it kind of does this lower neighbor thing right here, right? So it's on the E, goes down to the D, and then it goes back up to the E again. Now this right here, if you watched my last video on, or the last song analysis I did on the Foo Fighters' Pretender, you'll know I talked about appoggiaturas in there. Well, the appoggiatura, if you want to know what that is, go back and watch the video. But the opposite of an appoggiatura is actually called an escape tone, and that's what this is right here. So essentially what an escape tone is, it's a step up or down either direction, and then a leap in the opposite direction, right? So here we've got an E, and it goes up to an F sharp, and then it drops down to a B right here. And then it goes back up to the D, which is going to be the root. Now, escape tones, appoggiaturas, upper neighbors, lower neighbors, whatever, all of those that I'm talking about are forms of non-chord tones. So when you're writing a melody, you'll add in a non-chord tone, and that's going to, it's basically a note or a pitch that doesn't fit within the chord that it's singing over the top of. So for instance, in this case, so it starts off on an E, which in a G chord, that's going to be G, B, D, so that's obviously not in a standard G chord. But then it goes up to the F sharp, which that's not in a G triad either, but it's adding in that 7th of the F sharp, so it's making a G major 7 chord. It's only on there for a second though, and then it drops down to a B, which is going to be the 3rd of the chord. and then it lands on the D. That's the 5th of the chord. So now moving on, let's listen to this next phrase here. Going back to the rhythm here, this is really interesting because not a lot of vocal lines, at least that I've heard, will have these weird triplets here. Now, this phrase is actually, it has very similar motion to what this was doing as far as pitch goes. It starts out on the F sharp again, goes up to the A, goes up to the 6th on this B, and then it drops down. But this time, rather than kind of going down and then going back up, it just goes right down to the root on that D. So let's listen to this one more time. Now the next phrase, very similar motion again. This time more close to this one. Let's take a listen. So now this time, it's actually going to be the same exact thing to what it was here, but it's kind of adding in this line here, which is similar to this. And it's actually the same exact notes if you look at it. The rhythm is just different. Rather than having this rhythm, they have this rhythm. See, same exact pitches there. Now this last phrase is going to sound like this. So again, pretty much the same exact pitches, but just different rhythm, right? Don't need to spend too much time there. It lands on the D again. But now here, we've got this little pickup into the actual verse, rather going from the intro into the verse. Now, real quick before we dive into the verse here, I want to talk about this. When you're listening to Ed Sheeran's music, you'll notice a lot of the time that he throws in a lot of octaves. See, right here, it's on a D, on a low D, and then it goes all the way up to a high D here. And then it goes up to it lands on the F sharp, and it just goes up by step. So now moving on, I'm going to mute out the vocals here and just listen to what happens. We'll start 2 measures before the verse. Right, so the whole band comes in on this verse. Now, you'll notice that the electric guitar part here, it starts getting less busy. And that's just because the rest of the band is coming in, so it doesn't need to fill up as much space. So now here, like I said too, the progression stays the same even though the instruments come in. Let's listen to the bass and drums by themselves real quick. Not too difficult of a part, right? It's really, like I said, the main focus of this song is on Ed Sheeran's voice, really. So you can see here it starts on the root, and then it goes up to the F sharp, which is going to be the 3rd, right? Then it goes up to the G, up to the A, and then it drops back down to the D here. Same exact progression. Drums by themselves, really simple drum part as well. As a drummer, I would probably play that part a little bit differently, but that's just my own personal preference. But super simple. It's really just there to back up Ed Sheeran. That's really the only purpose of the band in this song. Also, the second electric guitar part comes in here. That's going to sound like this. So that's really just playing the chords. Both guitar parts sound like this right here. Now you can hear they're playing the same exact chords, but they're in different positions, right? So like right here, they're doing more bar chords and things of that nature in the second guitar part. And then in this part, they're doing more of the open chords like they were doing in the introduction. So now moving on, let's go back to the vocals and take a listen to what they've got going on. We're going to lead up with this line here. Now this starts on the A, which is the 5, and then it does that ba-da-da-dun, whereas this part is an octave. This one is just it starts on the 5th and it goes up to the root. But it's the same exact motion. Now this one here, what they're doing here is, I don't know if you can see, let me try and zoom in a little bit. So the grace note starts on a D, and then it goes up to the E here. right? So it starts on the root, but then it goes up to the second, holds over, sings the E again, and then it goes up to the fourth on this G, and then it goes down the scale back to the D. Now, the next one. This one is actually approached the same exact way here with the octave. Don't need to talk about that. Then it lands on this A again. So really it's the same exact thing as it was before, just with different words. Now this line, it ends differently. So it holds over on this D like it does before, but then it goes up to the third and then it holds that over. Now here, it's on an F sharp and then it does an octave back up to the F sharp. There's the octave again. Okay. Then it drops down to the E and it does a lower neighbor to the D and back up. And then it goes on the D and it just drops out. So now we're to the pre-chorus. So I'm just going to let you listen to the whole pre-chorus by itself. Let's take a listen. Alright, so before we move on to the melody line again, let's talk about the chord progression in this section because it does change again. So here it starts off on an E minor, and then that continues through until this measure where it switches to an A, and then on the fourth beat it switches to a D chord. In this measure, that switches over to an E minor again. Now, this F sharp is holding over from the D chord, so that makes it an E minor 9 in a way. Moving on, it goes back to just a regular E chord here. And then right here, it goes to an A7 chord. An A7 chord, or the A7 chord goes over until here where it goes E minor 9 again. And then right here, just in a regular E minor again. Here it goes to a regular A major chord. Then here, it does something completely different and it goes to a B minor chord. That carries over until here where it goes back to an E minor 9. And then right here, it ends on an A7. Now, I'm going to just play the chord progression for you, and it's going to sound like this. So it always goes back to this E minor chord. But then in this section, it goes up to an A. So it's starting, the E minor is going to be a 2 chord, a minor 2 chord. And then it goes up to the A, which is going to be the 5, which is pretty standard. You would expect that. And then it goes back to the D, which is the root, which of course you would expect that. Then it goes back to the minor 2, but then this time it goes to an A7 chord. That is the 5-7 chord, so it's still pretty predictable. Then this time it goes back to the E. Then this time it goes back to the A chord, but then it goes to a B minor, which is a 3. Now that you wouldn't expect at all, especially after hearing it go to 5 2 times. Then it goes back to the second again, and then it ends on this A7 again, the 5-7 chord. So not a super complicated chord progression. You know, it just generally will go from a 2-5-1, not super complicated at all. But then on that last one, it throws in a 2-3-1. You don't hear that a lot, and if you listen to it again, it definitely messes with your ears because it goes somewhere where you don't expect it to. Now, melody by itself, let's listen to this first phrase here. So now this first note starts on an E, and then that goes up to an F sharp right off the bat. But then it goes up to a G, upper neighbor, back down to the F sharp, then it goes back up to the G, back down to the F sharp. So that's going between the 3rd scale degree and the 4th scale degree. But then on this last one here, then it drops down to the 2nd on that E, drops down to the D, which is the root, and then it hangs over on the 2nd scale degree. Then it kind of does the same thing here. Does the grace note on the E up to the F sharp, and then it hangs over on the F sharp here. Then this next phrase sounds like this. This is very similar to the last one, right? But this time, instead of going ba-da-da, 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 bum, ba-dum, bum. So instead of doing that, it goes blah-da, blah-da, da-da-da, blum. So essentially what that's doing, We already know what it's doing here, upper neighbor. Then back down, it does a passing tone on this E to the D, hangs out there, and then it slides up to the E on that second again, and then that hangs over there. So really it's the same thing, it's just shorter, and the rhythm is different because it starts off the same exact way, but it ends the exact same way as well. It's just a matter of changing how you get from beginning to the end. What do we have here? We've got an octave into this grace note here, right? E to E. And then that goes up and does the same exact thing. I'll play the whole thing for you real quick. So pretty much the same exact thing. We've got the grace note from the E to the F sharp up to the G and back down. Don't need to talk too much about that. Then right here, it goes from the F sharp down to the E, down to the D again, and then it hangs out there. And then it does that grace note back up to the F sharp, and then it hangs over again. Now the next phrase. So that pretty much is the same exact thing as well. Same motion, ends on the E again. Now this little tagline here, or vocal line. It starts out on the B, which is going to be the 6th, and then it goes up to the D, up to the E, slides up to the F sharp, and then it kind of finds its way back down to the B again. Does the 16th note rhythm. But then from there, into the next measure, goes back up to the D, and then it slides up to the F sharp from the E. Now let's add in the rest of the band again. I'll play the chorus for you real quick. One thing I'll say real quick, just to get this out of the way, the chord progression is going to be the same exact thing as the verse here. Now the rhythms in this section of the song are really interesting, right? So let's listen to the vocal. Let's listen to this first phrase by itself real quick. So here we've got a grace note, which is on a G, and then that goes into an A, which is going to be the 5. And then that A just kind of hangs out on this dotted 8th note for three dotted 8th notes. Now these dotted 8th notes are pretty similar to the triplet quarter notes here, but they're just barely longer than the quarter note triplets. So then from the A, it goes back down to the G on the quarter note triplet, and then that slides down to the F sharp, and then that does a lower neighbor on this 8th to 16th back up to the half. That does a lower neighbor down to the E and back up to the F sharp. Now the next phrase. The rhythm on this is pretty weird. So you can see it's the same exact melody line as what was up here, but he switches up the rhythm here on this D. So he does still actually do the lower neighbor. I'll talk about that in a second. But right here, so it's a triplet. He's got quarter note, and then he's got a triplet on this dotted 8th note into a 32nd note here. So listening to it, it doesn't sound that weird, but looking at it, it looks pretty funky. So he's on the F sharp here, and then that hangs over and it drops down to this 32nd note triplet, and then it lowers down. Here's the lower neighbor on this grace note on E, and then it goes back up to the F sharp on this half note. Then that hangs over, and he goes back up to the G on this grace note and goes back up to an A, and then it drops all the way down to the E again, and then that's a lower neighbor too, and then that goes back up to the E here. The reason that this is all like the funky rhythms and everything is just because Ed Sheeran has that rap influence like I talked about earlier. When you're just listening to the song, it doesn't sound that funky, but when you're looking at the sheet music, super weird rhythms, right? Now moving on to the next phrase. The same exact thing as it was up here. Again, you can just repeat lines. I think that he does change up the lyrics there, but you can just repeat the same rhythm, right, in your choruses. It's going to stick out in people's minds. It's going to be more memorable that way. Now this next phrase. Now this one is a little bit different, right? So it starts on the 6th, and that goes up to the root here on the D. Then it goes back, or then it goes up to an E, holds over, goes up to the F sharp, goes back down to the E, and then it slides down to the D, goes back up to the E, and then it goes up to the F sharp, right? Now here, what do we have again? D up to D, another octave, right? Goes up to the E. Okay, now here, hangs over on the E again, and it goes back up to the F sharp, down to the E, down to the D, then it goes all the way down to this A here, and then it goes back up to a C sharp here, up to the D, back down to the C sharp, and then back up to the D. That last part of the phrase, I'll play it from right here, it's going to sound like this. So now when you're listening to that, you can hear it goes down to the 7th on that C sharp. That's only a minor second away. If you don't know what intervals sound like, essentially what a major second or a minor second is rather, it's simply jaws. But so when you go down to the 7th and it's a minor second away, it always wants to resolve up to the root of the chord. Now this ending here, it resolves exactly like you would expect to. Wa-da-da. So you can kind of hear jaws in there. Ba-da-da. Anyway, when you add in that 7th and a major key, it's automatically going to want to resolve up to that root. Now moving on to the second verse, I don't know that we have to spend too much time talking about this, but I'm going to play through the entire thing for you real quick. We don't need to talk too much about these first two lines. I'm just going to jump right up to this 77th measure here. Let's solo the vocals and let's listen to this line. So now what they're doing there is we're on the C sharp again, which is the 7th, and it goes up, it does an upper neighbor to the root on that D and goes back down. Then it goes down to this B, slides up to the C sharp, and then it goes all the way down here to the E, which is the 2nd, of course, and then it goes up to the F sharp. It's going to sound like this. Then it hangs out, plays again on that F sharp, and then it does that kind of rhythm where it goes ba, boom, ba, goes down, and then it goes back up, and then it goes down again. So it kind of does a lower neighbor. Not exactly a lower neighbor, though, because it's doing leaps rather than steps. But then right here, it does do a step down to the E. Then on the E again, goes up, does an upper neighbor up to the F sharp, back down to the E, and then it lands on the D here. Now real quick, let's listen to this whole phrase again. And then that resolves on the root again, exactly like you would expect it to. Now let's go in and let's listen to this second part of the verse. This phrase here, let's just listen to this whole thing. You'll notice it does change. Starting off, it's exactly the same, but then right here in the middle of the measure. So rather than going down like it's done in the past, it actually goes up. So it hangs out on this F sharp on the grace note, and it goes up to the G, and then it goes down to the E, down to the D, and then it goes all the way up to the A here. And then it goes down to the F sharp from the A, hangs over, and then it slides down to the D again. Now this last part here, real quick, it's going to sound like this. Now this is just a tagline kind of thing to wrap off the verse. It lands on this F sharp, goes down to the D, it does a lower neighbor on the D, and then it goes back up to the E. And then it goes from the D and it goes all the way up to the A. Now let's listen to the second pre-chorus real quick, all the way through. So it's exactly the same again, except for this section right here. Let's listen to it real quick. So exact same thing except for how it resolves here. So you can see we're on the E here, and then it goes down to the D and it goes up to the F sharp, slides up. Then what it does is it does this triplet on the E down to the D, and then it goes all the way down to the B, and then it slides down to an A. Now the next phrase has a little bit more variation to it. Okay, so same exact thing for the most part except for this section right here. It goes from the D up to the A on that, from the root to the 5, and then it's on the A here on this grace note, and it goes up to the B, and then it goes from on a grace note on an E up to the F sharp, and it lands there. One more time, let's listen to it. And then this last phrase, we'll just listen to it, exact same thing as it was before though. Rhythmically, it's a little bit different because of the lyrics. Now, this tagline right here. Again, that's another vocal variation at the end of the phrase that he threw in. But just to tell you the notes, it's an octave, of course, again. Goes from an A up to an A, down to an F sharp here, down to an E, and then it slides into the D here. Now let's listen to the second chorus all by itself, all the way through. I'm going to start from the beginning of this measure with this tagline. So now as you can see, the vocals are exactly the same for the most part. One real quick thing that I want to point out to you is that the choir actually gets added in here. And we can just listen to a section of that by itself real quick. It's actually singing an octave, so F sharp up to F sharp, right? D up to D. Here we've got a G up to a B, so it does go a little bit. It goes from an octave up to a 10th, actually. We've got A up to A, F sharp up to F sharp again, D up to D. The only real variation is just octaves, but on this line here. So, and that actually resolves pretty well. You can see this top line here, so it goes from a D up to a B. Now that's going from the root up to the 6th, and then that resolves perfectly down to the A, which is going to be the 5. It just makes the voice leading a little bit smoother. So now let's move on to the guitar solo here. As far as the chord progression goes, it's the same exact thing as it was in the verse and the chorus, so we don't really need to talk about that. So for the guitar solo, I don't want to talk too much about it just because it has a lot to do with guitar technique, and that's not really what my channel is focused on. But what I will say is that there's a lot of cool stuff going on in here, especially for today's music standards. We also have, you'll notice here, Ed Sheeran adds in these kind of vocal lines right here. So, and that's just kind of a cool thing that you can add in over the top of guitar solos as well if you want to. A lot of the time music won't do that just because in the guitar solo is the main focus, of course. But it does add a little bit of texture and a little bit more layers to that section of the song. Let's listen to how this transitions into the last chorus. Okay, so now the chorus is going to be pretty much exactly the same as far as the vocals. So other than right here. Here we've got, it goes from an E up to the F sharp, back down to the E, got an upper neighbor again, and then it lands on the D, goes on an E, goes back up to the F sharp, and then it goes down to the E on this triplet, goes up to a G, and then it slides down to an F sharp, goes down to an E, and it slides down to the D. Then here, we're on the B, and it goes up to, or which is the 6th, and it goes up to the D. Okay. And then it goes from the D up to an E, goes from the E back up to the F sharp, down to the E again, so we've got an upper neighbor, down to the D, back to the E, and slides up to an F sharp. And then here we've got the octave from the D up to the D again, up to the E, E up to F sharp on the outro. And then this is pretty much exactly how you would expect it, pretty much how it's always been, other than this measure right here. So then from there, or on this measure, it goes back up to the F sharp and goes up to a G, up to an A, then it goes back to the E up to the F sharp, and then it goes back to the E, and then it does this triplet thing down to a D, and then it goes down to a B, and it actually goes lower than you're anticipating. So it goes from a B down to an A, and then that repeats. Then it goes back up to the E, up to the F sharp again, and then it does this motion, kind of what we're expecting, but different again. So it goes from the F sharp down to the E again, down to the D again like you're expecting, then it goes down to an A on that 5, which you're not expecting, and then it drops down to this F sharp and up to the G, again not expecting that, up to the A on the 5 again, then that goes all the way down to an E, up to an F sharp, and then that goes from an E down to the D, and then the song ends. So anyway guys, thank you for checking this out. This has been Thinking Out Loud by Ed Sheeran. Thank you for checking out this video guys. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned a lot from thinking out loud. Now before I let you go, I want to let you know about a free gift that I've got for you down below this video. I put this free gift together for you because I can remember back when I first started writing music and when I was trying to improve my songwriting that I had a difficult time with actually writing music. When I was first starting out, I would sit down and I would try to play something, but for some reason I would just freeze up. As I started improving as a songwriter, I still faced these issues every once in a while. But even when I didn't, I wasn't always happy with what I was writing. It wasn't until I made up my songwriting flowchart that I was able to sit down and look at this and go start to finish in a much more efficient way, still writing high quality music that was authentic to myself. Now I don't want to just keep this flowchart to myself. I want to share it with you and other songwriters out there. And that's why I've left it down below in the description box below this video. If you want access to my songwriting flowchart, go ahead and click the link down below in the description and I'll send it right to your email box 100% free. And as always, if you did enjoy this video and you want more song analyses in the future, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you did enjoy the video, be sure to leave it a thumbs up. Anyway guys, that's it for me. Thank you again for watching this video and we'll see you in the next one.